Convict transport Tellicherry has held a fascination for me since 2005, when I first learnt that it had brought my 4 times great-grandfather, who was one of the Wicklow Rebel Leaders of the 1798 rebellion in Ireland, to our shores. It also brought the woman who would become my 4 times great-grandmother. I received an invitation to a reunion which had been planned to commemorate 200 years since the ship had arrived on the 15th of February 1806. This reunion took place at the Campbelltown Catholic Club in February 2006, in the area where so many of the Tellicherry transportees had spent time. Meeting other descendants of those aboard the ship was very special indeed. It was a shared history which begged to be told. Over the years, I've spent a considerable number of hours researching this ship and many of those on board. Through my research, I discovered links to the Hunter Valley and also to other members of the Newcastle Family History Society. This research will form the basis for the Newcastle Family History Society publication of the same name in the very near future. Members of our convict special interest group have enthusiastically researched some of those on board the Tellicherry, and our female convict bonnet makers have made 2 complete sets of bonnets, which we will feature when the publication is finally launched. Today, I'll share the story of the Tellicherry women with you. The Tellicherry was a mixture of convicts as well as free men and women. It held an unusual cargo. There were 5 unconvicted Wicklow rebels from the 1798 rebellion. The government was very keen to send them far away from Ireland, never to return. They could take their wives and children if they wished. Arthur Devlin and John Murner, 2 of the rebels, were unmarried. Martin Burke's wife, Rachel, didn't accompany her husband. Michael Dwyer and his wife, Mary, chose to leave their young children with family, and they would follow at a later date. Hugh Vesty Byrne and his wife, Sarah, had chosen to leave their eldest son behind and to bring their 2 youngest, Michael 5 and Rose 2. Sarah was also expecting their 4th child. She was born along the way. Her name was Anne. Anne is Pat's 4 times great-grandmother. I was keen to identify the women and girls aboard the ship. My starting point was to take a look at the convict indents from the State Records of New South Wales, a primary source. I could find the name of each convict. I could find where each convict was convicted, when they were convicted, and the term that they were given. Later indents provide more information. Almost 39,000 Ireland Australian transportation records are held at the National Archives of Ireland in Dublin. They provide wonderful details on each of the convicts who were transported on all of the ships, including the Tellicherry. These records are available and supply a document reference number, a date, and a record number. They also give you some information about where they were made. For example, in comment 1, Dr. Harding's Journal of Attendance on Convicts on board the hulks and in the jails in Cork, awaiting transportation. And he visited those convicts on the 17th of June, 1805. So there's quite a bit of information on some of these. Changes could occur at any stage. 26 of the 36 female convicts who sailed on board the Tellicherry were inspected by Dr. Harding. 19 additional female convicts inspected that same day didn't depart on the Tellicherry at all. However, another 8 did. The accepted list of 36 female convicts can be seen in the 3 columns on the left-hand side of the screen. Those who came free are to the right. The ages are taken from the Colonial Secretary's papers, the 1806 special bundles. As you can see, the women are not that dissimilar in age. In later records, we find that many of the women are still in contact with one another, so it's quite likely that at least some of them formed a fairly strong bond of friendship and support. 22 of the women were convicted in Dublin City. 3 were convicted in Wicklow, 3 in Meath, 5 in Limerick, 2 in Clare, and 2 in County Kerry. Dublin, Wicklow and Meath are not that far apart from one another when we look on a map. Limerick, Clare and County Kerry are further away to the southwest. When we look at the list on the right-hand side of the screen, those who came free, we've got Sarah Byrne, who was the wife of Hugh Vesty Byrne. She had little Rose with her and also Michael, and little Anne, who was born on board. Then we have Mary Dwyer. She was the wife of the Wicklow chief, Michael Dwyer. And remember that they'd left their children behind, fearful of the effects that the trip might have on them. It was quite dangerous to travel by sea in those days. We have Mary Gow, or Go, as I suspect it may have been pronounced. She was the wife of one of the soldiers on board. Mary Neal is a bit of a mystery. We'll look at her a bit more in a minute. And then we have Elizabeth Flavin, a little 7-year-old. Now, there was a male convict called Maurice Flavin on board. And there's also been some suggestion that Elizabeth may have been Bridget Shea's child. Bridget Shea was one of the female convicts. So a little bit more investigation is needed there. Cork Harbour, where the Tellicherry departed from, was a stronghold of the British Navy at this time. It was an incredibly busy harbour. The East India Fleet was due to depart on the 28th of August. But unfavourable winds caused a delay until the 31st of August, 1805. That last day of August must have been an amazing sight, as 3 battleships led the way out of the harbour, followed by 2 frigates, 38 transport ships, 19 East India men, shown in the picture here, and the convict ships William Pitt, with 120 female convicts from England, and the Tellicherry with almost 170 Irish convicts, both tagging along for part of the way. The convict ships parted company with the East India Fleet and continued on towards the Cape. The Tellicherry spent 3 days in Madeira and then sailed on. The William Pitt remained there for quite some time. Those aboard the Tellicherry were fortunate in that Captain Cousins was a kind man. He looked after the well-being of all on board, not generally the norm on many convict ships. The area set aside for the female convicts was small and cramped. The captain then set aside the hospital for the Wicklow rebels and for the free women. He sent food from his own table to Sarah Byrne to ensure she remained well throughout her pregnancy. He also permitted the convicts to spend as much time as possible on deck to ensure that their health remained good. The summer weather that year was kind. John Connellan, the surgeon aboard the Tellicherry, had been an informer during the 1798 rebellion. The government was very keen for him to leave Ireland. It appears he may have struck up a relationship with one of the female convicts from Dublin by the name of Catherine Brady. She became his housekeeper and moved from place to place with Connellan. In some musters, Catherine is actually identified by the surname Connellan. The Paracensus of Australia is a collation of primary sources from 1788 to 1828. It's a wonderful resource which is often overlooked by researchers. I've given just 2 examples here, but search the resource thoroughly to locate the whereabouts of primary sources which could be sought out to provide some information on each of the women I was looking for. The first example shows an entry for 7-year-old Elizabeth Flavin. It provides a collation of all the names that she used throughout her life up until 1828. You'll notice that she used the name Fitzgerald at one stage. Bridget Shea was also recorded with that name. We're given an alternative spelling for Flavin as well, and 2 other names. Power was her married name. The list of resources to the right indicates where the information came from. We'll take a look at that in a minute. The second entry is for Catherine Fines from Dublin. You'll note the asterisk indicating that there are other entries in the Paracensus for Catherine. The cross next to Michael's name indicates that it's a family group and that he is the head of that family. The tilde next to Catherine's name indicates that she is the final entry for that family group. This slide shows just a small section of the codes used in the Paracensus and the source that each code refers to. There are 2 full pages of code source combinations, so you can see the extent of the resources that were accessed to create the Paracensus. Mary Neal is one of my more recent discoveries. She came as a free woman on the Tellicherry. Why? She didn't marry until 1818, some 12 years after her arrival. It appears she didn't come out to follow a convict husband or another family member. She eventually marries a convict called George Pinkerton, who'd been fighting in South Africa. One of the witnesses to their marriage was Michael Grant, who was the husband of Eleanor Tyrrell from the Tellicherry. Was Mary Neal the wife of one of the soldiers on board, like Mary Gow? Was she Michael Dwyer's sister? In Kieran Sheedy's 1988 book entitled Upon the Mercy of the Government, mention is made of Dwyer's married sister, Mary Neal, being arrested in late 1803 because her husband was a supporter of Robert Emmet. There is a death recorded for one of Michael Dwyer's sisters in northern New South Wales. Could it possibly be Mary? Mary Gow is believed to be an English lass who was married to one of the soldiers on board the Tellicherry. The New South Wales Corps was to receive an additional 28 privates who arrived on the ship. Mary's son John was born not long after their arrival in New South Wales, but sadly her husband, who was also named John, died a few months later, leaving her a widow in a new land with a newborn baby. She did not remarry until 1810. As you can see here, some musters are more helpful than others. In the 1822, none of Mary's children are named, nor are their ages given. Mary is recorded as the wife of T. Callidge in Windsor. In the 1825 muster, she was the wife of Gullidge, Windsor. The 1825 muster lists the names and ages of their children. 2 of Mary's daughters married into prominent families in the Singleton district. Her eldest, Charlotte, married Richard Alcorn, who owned a succession of inns in the area. And Jemima married into the Singleton family, after whom the town is named. Sadly, Mary is buried in an unmarked grave at Whittingham Cemetery just outside Singleton, with her son Isaac, who died in his 20s. Once the Tellicherry arrived, those who were unwell were transferred to the General Hospital. The next morning, Captain Cousins, Surgeon Conlon, and the Wicklow rebels went to Government House to meet Governor Kidd, where they were entitled to be granted 100 acres along the Cabramatta Creek. They were also entitled, as new settlers, to draw rations for 18 months and to receive 2 assigned convicts who would also be fed or victualled by the government. The Colonial Secretary's office took charge of the convict indents, and the convicts were transferred up the river to Parramatta. There was a brief muster carried out here, and many of the convicts were assigned at that stage. The government always took the tradesmen. Next, the military and the ex-officers had their turn to choose. These men were often landholders. Most of the female convicts went into domestic service. Some women went to the Parramatta Female Factory. We will shortly take a look at those women. This, of course, was the early Parramatta Female Factory, not the one that's in its current location. It was quite timely that the 1806 muster showed exactly where most of the female convicts of the Tellicherry were assigned from the outset. 9 that we know of went to the original Parramatta Female Factory. Looking at the entries from the primary source, I could see that 3 women were also at the Parramatta Hospital, and exactly who was assigned to who originally. Mary Johnson, who was my 4 times great-grandmother, was already with John Murner. Their children were born a short while later. Elizabeth, who was my 3 times great-grandmother, was born in 1810. Unfortunately, the 1811 muster does not provide a great deal of information. However, the 1814 muster does. We find many changes of circumstance with a lot of the women. We're told whether they're receiving government rations, whether their status is free, or if they are still considered convicts. We are also told who they're married to or living with and how many children are with them. Some of the women have married other Tellicherry convicts. Bridget Shea married Michael Fitzgerald. Mary Johnson is living with John Murner, and Eleanor Burke has married Darby Murray. We have already started to lose sight of some of the women, and this continues as we research further records. The convicts who were transported to Australia, both male and female, had differing life experiences. Some fared far better in their new land than they ever would have been or ever would have done back home. Mary Goff was one of them. Mary was tried in Dublin City in 1804 at the age of 23, and she was sentenced to 7 years transportation because of her prior convictions. She had a son named Thomas Smithmore. It's uncertain exactly when the child was born, before, during, or after the journey. It appears that there may have been a crewman on the ship by the surname Smithmore. In 1806, in the muster, Mary already possessed her ticket of leave and was self-employed with 1 child. In the 1814 muster, Mary and 2 children were living with H. Williams. But in 1808, she had had a son with Robert Murray, who was a free seaman. Her son was baptised Robert Goff. In 1826, Mary, now in her early 40s, married Thomas Cooper, who was 60. Thomas had arrived as a convict as well, from Lancashire in 1810. Thomas became wealthy as a publican and landowner in central Sydney. A number of newspaper items at the time referred to him as a gentleman. Thomas Cooper's name is listed next to the names of 5 properties, with yet another 4 listed with the name of Thomas and Mary Cooper. Mary Goff died at the fairly young age of 53 and was buried alongside her husband, Thomas Cooper, in the Devonshire Street Cemetery, as so many of the early inhabitants of Sydney were. In 1901, they were reinterred at Rookwood with the Smidmore family when work began on the extensions to Central Railway Station. Marrickville Heritage Society recently published an article called Meet the Smidmores to provide information about the background of their area. That background quite naturally made reference to Mary Goff, Thomas Cooper, and Mary's son, Thomas Smidmore. The article states that at the time of Mary's death in 1843, her estate was worth £20,000, over $3 million in today's money. The article goes on to discuss the life of Mary's son, Thomas Smidmore, and his legacy as a councillor on Sydney's first city council. Thomas had also become a newspaper man by then. With 13 children, all grandchildren of Mary Goff, the legacy continues as an important part of Sydney's heritage. The women of the Tellicherry are part of so many family histories. They're amongst the matriarchs and pioneers of New South Wales. As part of the Roses from the Heart initiative of Dr. Christina Henry, artist in residence at the Cascades Female Factory, a bonnet tribute has been made for each of the women and girls aboard the ship to acknowledge the part they played in the history of Australia. The research on the Tellicherry is ongoing. I would now like to invite some questions from you, if you have any, and I'll make an attempt to answer some of them for you. Yes.
I'm intrigued about Bridget O'Shea and the potential of being the mother of Elizabeth Flavin, was it?
Yes.
Because when you put their names up, when you first mentioned it, the age that I thought was beside Bridget was 21 and beside the little girl, 7. So
Yes.
I wondered, does it make sense, or were they information from different periods of time?
No, they were information from the same time, but you have to remember that during these periods of time, people often didn't know exactly how old they were. So there's a likelihood that Bridget may have been a little older than she thought she was or gave. It said she was, yes. Or the little girl may not have been 7. I've actually looked at Bridget and the little girl, Elizabeth, fairly carefully. And it's a little bit hard to know whether she was Bridget's daughter, but I'm suspecting she was. There's quite a few little mysteries with this ship. Mary Neal is a real puzzle. I only discovered her quite by accident. And when I was reading a couple of Kieran Sheedy's books, just in one tiny little sentence in one of his books, Mary Neal, the sister of Michael Dwyer, was mentioned. And I thought, I wonder. But I'm not sure if it's correct because Mary Neal, his sister, was the one who was supposed to look after the Dwyer children back in Ireland. So there's still a bit more research to be done, but I don't know whether I'll ever get the complete information on it. You may have noticed that I said those 5 Wicklow rebels were sent out unconvicted. Yes. I discovered that, actually Glenn discovered it, when I was doing some research and we were trying to find out when John Myrna got his certificate of freedom. And when we actually delved into it, the documentation said that he didn't get a certificate of freedom for the simple fact that he had never been convicted of anything. They didn't convict the 5 Wicklow rebels because it would have caused an almighty outcry in Ireland, because they were the leaders of the 1798 rebellion in that area. And if they had tried to convict them and hang them, it really may have caused quite a rebellion. They actually thought they were going to America. Up until just before they left, they all thought they were going to America. And then all of a sudden they weren't. And they came out to Australia. Michael Dwyer, incidentally, never, ever saw his children again. They kept putting off sending them out, the government of Ireland. And eventually they did get here, but he'd been dead a year by that stage. He died at 56. So he never actually got to see them again, which was very sad. Michael Dwyer became a councillor on around the Cabramatta area. He was a fairly important constable and councillor around the area.
How did they encourage these Wicklow rebels to, was it first because they thought they were going to America? And were they dangled the carrot of land because they got land straight away when they came to New South Wales?
They had been promised land. They'd been promised 100 acres and they had been promised £100. They were all given the land along the Cabramatta River, one plot next to each other. They wanted to be able to keep an eye on them, particularly as it had not long passed that the Castle Hill riot had happened. Yeah.
So the alternative for them was that they might get hung, I guess.
I think the government would have loved to have gotten rid of them that way, but it was. I don't think it was really an option. There's quite a bit of connection between the Hunter area and the Tellicherry people. Quite a few of the men were sent up to Coal River as a secondary transportation system. We had, as I said, Pat's 4 times great-grandmother was Anne Byrne, and her 5 times great-grandparents were Hugh Vesty Byrne and Sarah Byrne. My ancestors were Mary Johnson and John Murner. John Murner was the last of the rebels to be captured. Well, he actually gave himself up. What some of the rebels used to do was the locals would look after them, they'd give them food, they'd give them shelter. And then as the rebels left, they said to them, okay, you give me a start of X amount of time, and then you call the constables and let them know that I was here and I stole from you and I forced you to look after me, so that the people couldn't be accused of helping them. So that was something that they did quite frequently.
Are you going to work on the men of Tellicherry as well?
Yes, the men are already being researched by the Convict Special Interest Group.
Oh, I see.
Yes, the reason we're forging ahead with the women first, there's a couple of reasons actually. One is because there are only 36 female convicts,
Yeah.
and because there are 170 convicts all up, there's quite a lot of men. So when I originally started doing this research, I thought I'll look at the women first and we'll get a publication out there and then we'll look at the second one. So some of our members have done research on the women as well. Robin Jeffries has done quite a lot of research on some of the women for me. What you were looking at on the screen is work that I've done many years ago, and I've actually put it together into that format. So that will be the beginnings of the book before we actually look at the individual women. And it's not just the convicts, we're looking at the free people who came on board as well. We've also discovered that some other people in the Hunter, Chris Holden's wife, her 3 times great-grandmother is also one of the female convicts. Mary Nagel, one of the convicts, was sent to Newcastle in, I think, 1811, and she returned to Sydney in 1813. Mary Nagel, Mary Fagan, and also Mary McNulty. She was to be sent in February 1812 up to Newcastle. So if you look at them alongside the Mary Go's family, who ended up in Singleton, there's quite a bit of connection with the Hunter. Now, around the Campbelltown area, there's a huge lot of descendants of the Tellicherry people. When I went to the day to celebrate the 200 years arrival of the Tellicherry, there were a couple of hundred people there who were all descended from people on board that ship. But since, I've met a lot of people and I've asked them, were they there that day? And they've said, no, they knew nothing about it. So I'm assuming there's a lot of people out there who also didn't know anything about it. I think there will be a fairly wide market for the publication. And the other thing, originally, I was asked to launch it in Cork. Dr. Christina Henry, with the Bonnets Project, she launches the occasional book over there, and she had asked whether one launch could be done in Cork. And I guess it's a possibility, because that would be of great interest to the people in Cork and in Dublin, because a lot of those families still have people there.
Well, before you go on to something else, Mel, can we just say thank you on behalf of everybody in the room and probably in Zoom land as well? And I think we've all very much enjoyed it. And thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.